I'm very happy to be chairing this panel of these three great people up here. We have at the far end, Christie. Lanuis, thank you, from the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. Michele Fazio from the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, and Tim Strangleman from the University of Kent. All, I believe, past presidents of the WCSA, which is wonderful. And I'm really happy to get this started. So I don't know if we're going in this order or if it's just a more casual.
Tim is going to begin, and Lori, I realized you were struggling to pronounce my name. It's misspelled. Tim's going to kick us off, and I'll say here just at the outset that the three of us intend just to kind of seed the conversation, but really we want this to be an interactive session. So hope folks are ready to talk.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. So I think in the conference we had in Wisconsin, the three of us sat down and after too many beers decided that we wanted to do this handbook. And that's a long time ago, but I've got a track record of taking a long time on books. And essentially what we recognised, and the conversation we've had across the years, is some of us have been coming to this conference now since, well, in my case, 99, I think that's true of colleagues. And we have gone through working class studies and it's given a lot to us. But we also recognise that, I speak for myself here, that we're middle-aged. And whilst we sat at the feet of some of the people originally involved who founded and we were involved in the founding of the association, we also recognise that there's got to be a debate about working class studies, about how we've generated, developed and transformed this very, very vibrant field from perhaps a field that was looking at working class in the long boom, in Flores, looking back, trying to find value in that at a time in the 1990s when it was subject to 2 decades of deindustrialization, to increasingly where we are now, where those issues of deindustrialization and Fordism, post-Fordism are still relevant and important, and finding value in the working class is still important. But nonetheless, the working class is changing, has changed, has always changed, and there's a whole bunch of people way younger than us who the way they live working class lives, the way they study working class lives, the way they engage in society and culture is different. And we recognise that we are, I don't want to keep saying we're old, but I'm still 20 in my mind. This body is anyway, so I think what we're interested in is, and we were very struck when we put the proposal together, was one of the criticisms we got was not enough attention paid to issues of precarity, which we did want to look at. So what we're trying to do is we recognise that there's a whole bunch of issues that working class studies needs to constantly renew itself on and be forward-facing and correct to remain relevant, to remain something that isn't just a kind of historical with us, will be with us in the future. What does that working class look like? How do we engage with it? How do we study it? How do we study it as part of it? So we came up with the idea of the handbook really is a way of moving a dialogue with Sherry and John's New Working Class Studies of 2005. Yeah. So by the time the book comes out, hopefully next year, that will be 14 years on. My maths is pretty good. For a non-quantitative social scientist. So it's 14 years on, and you think of the developments we've had in the field, the founding of the association, the journal, the bunch of conferences we've had since, there's a lot to talk about. So I know Michele and Christie will talk about this, but what we're trying to capture is the conversation where we've been, where we've done, but more important, where we are now and where we want to go. But what we don't want, and this is really where we get to tell off the audience, what we don't want, and I want to catch Sherry's eye because she knows this too well, what we don't want is a bunch of lists about what we should be doing. What we want to try and capture is the dynamic of the field, what people want, what they're prepared to do, what they're doing, not you should be doing this. If you're going to do that, maybe buttonhole us in the corridor, not now. So I'll hand over to
Yeah, and also just a little bit about the logistics of the volume that's shaping up. So it has been since 2005 that New Working Class Studies that Sherry and John edited came out, and so we explicitly pitched our volume kind of in relation to that, to say, more than a decade on, it's time for another kind of anthology that collects together, gives a forum for what's going on in the field. It has grown quite unwieldy, as you will see. So we proposed and are working with 6 thematic sections. We're working with 37 chapters right now, plus 6 overview essays. So an overview essay for each of those sections. We may be over length, but I will say we are working with Rutledge, and they have this series, a handbook series. So ours won't be the only kind of doorstop tome out there. We may have to do some begging, to see if we can go over length. So you can see then what our 6 thematic sections are. And many folks in the room have chapters in the volume. So that brings us to the final part of the book. So the 3 of us are writing an editorial introduction, the 6 thematic sections, and then this final section, future directions in working class studies. Our intent is to make it a cacophony of voices, to represent and incorporate as many voices and perspectives as possible. And that is where you all come in. Originally, when we talked about our vision for the final section, we imagined a rather kind of planned out, staged dialogue or conversations between 3 generations in the field. So founding members, ourselves, as Tim won't let us forget, we are middle-aged, so we're in the middle generation, and then kind of an up-and-coming generation. Folks who are undergraduates, graduate students, just entering the field. And the more we talked about that, the more dissatisfied we were with that. It felt staged. And so instead what we've decided to do is to co-author it, the 3 of us, but to try to bring in as many voices as possible, right? So a broader, looser, more inclusive set of reflections. So we are, I'm going to skip the slide to say, this is being live streamed, which also means it's recorded. So we're going to draw on that. We're going to revisit the conversation, right, as messy as it is, and I hope it will be. But we're also soliciting written comments and responses from folks. And we really, I can't emphasize enough, would like to encourage anybody and everybody, including people who are not in this room, right? So part of the idea was, part of what we were thinking about is the fact that not everybody could be at this conference. Some folks are giving, this is a concurrent session, so there are other people presenting right now. So we wanted a way for input beyond this moment. So we created a Gmail account at which we will gladly receive, accept written comments through the end of the month, through June 30th. And we would like to capture folks' ideas, whether kind of both from our notes and from the recording, the general threads and themes that come out, but may also quote directly from folks who send us written comments. So that's the logistics piece.
Christie,
Yeah,
for those of us with bad eyesight, could you read the email address?
I sure can. HBWCS 18, Handbook of Working Class Studies. That's what the HBWCS 18@gmail.com.
Sorry, I'd just like to add, since we're on the slide, the three of us wrote a blog for working class perspective. So if you click on that, it's obviously online, so you can just go there and see, and the email address is there.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the blog post lays out in a little more verbiage sort of what our thinking is and where we're at with the project. Yeah, sorry, now I have to get back to the slides. I'm not used to being on a PC. It gives me great anxiety. Okay, here we go. So this section of the handbook, just really briefly, we want to invite reflections on the field, ask questions about how we can continue to build and sustain in the face of, right, some of the things that Tim gestured at: automation, globalization, deindustrialization, the rise of precarious work. But also, in addition to the kind of big picture thinking, we're also really interested in more pragmatic, logistical, concrete things around building this field, right? The kind of infrastructure for the future, including future conference organizing, community activism, mentoring, which Michele and I talked to you a little bit about in other contexts, research, including special issues of the Journal of Working Class Studies, grant writing, teaching. So not just kind of big picture, abstract things, but also logistical things.
So Tim already touched upon this. In the past few years, or over the years, we've had a number of opportunities to gather together and share our ideas. And I think it's really important. We think it's important to have a collective space to work through some of this. Last year, we had a number of action gathering meetings. We were really productive in hearing from members what's missing from the conferences, how can the organization help the membership grow as well as the field. For example, we've implemented changes in the conference program, mentoring and increasing our social media. So we're seeing this year some of those direct changes, and that really inspired us to open up the final chapter of the handbook. So now is our time to reflect upon this, about the future of working class studies. And these questions, we hope, will guide you through this in the time that we have today. So what is the field of working class studies to you? What do you want and need working class studies to be in the coming decades? Going forward, what is your role in creating the field that you want and need? And I think the most important question for us today, how could you use the handbook? And we're thinking in terms of activism, teaching, and methodology. So part of in the proposal that we wrote for Rutledge is who's the audience and how will this be used? So we brainstormed what we thought it would be, but it would be really great to even have more concrete answers from you that we could incorporate. So now it's your turn.
Is it designed to be given out like an AAUP red book kind of thing for possible cross-pollination between like activists and academics and stuff like that?
The handbook?
Yeah, like, here's a primer on all the big issues and how to build solidarity and how to understand class, how to organize, and how to see how we're represented in the media and write letters to the editor. I don't know. That kind of thing.
And I've seen that there was a handbook that came out for Italian American Studies, and it's a big book. And with 37 chapters, I'm really frightened of what the book is going to look like. So it's about also how do we, that information might be available in other chapters, like the website, but not the book.
That's right. Okay.
And I'm thinking out loud right now.
Initially, I think the crowd said it's going to come out hardback only, but we would really push them, given what was going to happen next year when we could launch it in the UK. I think we should try and push them to the softback, which will still be expensive, but it will be more readily affordable. But some of that is in there, particularly individual chapters might do it, but also the section chapters that we're trying to give each chapter that summarises the section, tries to be a history of where it's come from, what the relevance of working class studies perspective is on activism or method or whatever, what's unique about it, and then some kind of future projection about how it might change and what the challenges are. So it's seeded through the book on lots of the things you're sort of suggesting.
especially in the activism section, I'm looking at Karen Gaffney in particular, it walks us through the whole process of how you engage your community. So it is a bit of a how-to, which is really nice to read that and see why to apply some of this, maybe.
I wanted to suggest that since it is going to be big, that maybe even more important than a paperback is if you can get Refuge to put out an ebook.
They are, yeah. So that would be really
so that makes it more accessible.
with the with hardback, and then they'll follow up with the soft cover. Laura, do you want to manage or? Okay. All right.
I was
Jeremy
just
can
like
next.
very, it'd be great to just see the table of contents, quite frankly. Just to see what you guys are thinking and like to see like just, not just the basic table of contents, just to see where the thinking of the stuff is. If you could.
Yeah, I feel a little too vulnerable to like, we have like, this messy marked up Excel spreadsheet with titles, but nothing, yeah.
No, fair enough.
Yeah,
I just get 5 seconds.
Sure. I think, Michelle, what we could do probably on the fly as the conversation progresses, Michelle could pull it up and kind of read some titles for sure. Yeah. Sherry?
I was just going to make the point about sort of what the book can do, that it's my sense from talking to you all that this is a book really aimed at people in working class studies, not at people in working class organizations. And so this is not addressed to the working class community organization about how do you do whatever. It's really about how do we as academics do this work in the at least 3, maybe 4 realms that we work. We teach, we do research, we do community engagement, we do activism. And I would define those 2 things as slightly different. And so that there are pieces in here that will point towards all of this. But it seems to me part of what a handbook can do is be the thing to which you direct colleagues who are curious, graduate students who are getting started, to say, do you want to know what this is? Here. Here's a place to go to get a sense, as well as to get some of that more practical, you want to know, well, how do I do an interdisciplinary study of working class culture? Well, here's some sections on methods. I would bet, based on what I know about things like pricing from Rutledge, that I'm not going to assign the whole book in a class. But I may very well assign sections, so things like an ebook that my library would have, that I could say to my students, everybody go read, X chapter on whatever. And I think that's a really, I think that would be really useful in helping people to kind of find their way into this field.
Hand up over here. Yeah.
I had a clarifying question and a suggestion. The clarifying question is, am I correct in understanding that what y'all's goal is for this session to really focus on where people see their field going, and that will then generate thought for you for what you're going to put in the book?
Correct.
Yeah.
In this final section.
Yeah.
Which is sort of the conclusion, the concluding section to the volume.
So the one suggestion that I had, so on my I teach at a small liberal arts college, and I'm both one of the only people who teaches Intro to Gender Studies, and the only person who teaches how teach a class, How Class Works, and the only one who does a class like that, that's sort of intro to the study of class. I mean, some other colleagues do some work on class, obviously, but I'm the only who teaches and the contrast between sort of, if you're going to do an Intro to Gender Studies, there's a lot of places you can look to find out what is an Intro to Gender Studies class supposed to be, versus if you're going to do a class on Intro to Class or How Class Works, there are some resources, but there's not that same kind of field-wide consensus or sort of varying approaches. So one thing that I think would be useful both for the field as well as in a book like this is, if you're someone who, you're going to bring an Intro to Class or How Class Works course to your institution, what are some of the best practices, what are some of the field consensus, and or what are some of the options you have for the different approaches you could take? Whether that's in the form of just outlining it in the final section, whether there's an actual portion of the book that says, here's some of the best sense of the field of what an introductory class should look like, could be really helpful.
Yeah, I feel like as a field, one of the things that we're poised to do moving forward, so future directions of working class studies, is to create that. So I think we could gesture toward that. I think we should, but it will then we'll frame part of our conclusion as an invitation to please take this and run. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the issues around interdisciplinarity is that you have to, my thought, and I don't know whether you've done it, I think this is a wonderful project, is how do you deal with the disciplines that make up the interdisciplinarity? And as far as I can tell, there's nobody who has a position in working class studies. That's not, and there may have been a moment where that might have happened, but it certainly isn't this one. There must be too much more comfortable with ruling class studies, I think.
That's most of the curriculum.
That's right. That's called college, right? So I have a couple of questions with that about what it seems that one of the strengths of at least the kind of part of working class studies that came out of John and Sherry's work. One of the strengths of it was the real humanities emphasis. But at the same time, there seems to be that, as at our conferences and in our some work and the discussions I've heard, a real kind of absence of what used to be central to discussions of working class, which is political economy. And some of it is I think, really, it's political, right? Mike Zweig, who was the original person at Stony Brook, told me that when he was hired in here in 1965, the economics department told him he was going to be the last Marxist ever hired. And it's true. It's only gotten worse, right? Most of economics departments are dominated by the right. They will refuse to hire, and any young person who decides to go to graduate school in economics and thinks they're going to do explications of capital, they should be advised to do something else, right? Those jobs don't exist. So that's one of that. There's a structural as well as a kind of a problem that we can solve about saying where do we put class is not just humanities centered, it's structural. And I think that there needs to be a way of having that part of it. Second part of this is, I'm in this place of coming from labor studies into working class studies. And this is very privileged because we always do working class studies. But we didn't call it that, and we didn't have the sensibility that working class studies was developing. In fact, people like Joe and myself who see that the future of labor studies is in working class studies are still a minority within our field, even though some of the questions are very similar. But I think that there needs to be some sense of what the disciplines that are bringing things in. The discussion this morning about Sherry's book around literature, it was phenomenal, and that is clear. But where are the other disciplines, and what are we learning? Where are we doing with history? What are we doing with sociology? What are we bringing in from labor studies? And I think that may help people say, I got a position, I just got this, I'm an assistant professor in sociology, and I got this job because I'm a really good sociologist, which meant that I didn't really deal with these issues in my dissertation, right? And now I'm coming back to the issues that I want to come back to. How do I work within the context of the sociology department?
I just want to respond real quickly to say that in John and Sherry's in your working class studies in 2005, there's a wonderful laying out of the origins of the field and the disciplinary thread, perspectives that it draws on. One thing I think that we could do 15 years on is to say, has that changed? Right? We don't have to cover the same ground. We can reference, and we do that, and think about whether that's changed. But if we're finding working class studies in different locations now. Yeah.
Can I say one thing really quickly
Sure.
about that? Which is that as we're talking about change, Randy and I are just saying to each other, we need to also acknowledge the things that don't change. So 15 years ago, one of the things that, as the Working Class Studies Association was just getting started, one of the things we did was stage conversations about the relationship between labor history, working class studies, and labor history, and labor studies, which we had at the Working Class Studies conferences, at the Organization of American Historians, and the Watcher Conference, the Labor and Working Class History.
And the geography.
And at the UALI Conference for labor educators. So that was the work we were doing 15 years ago. Clearly, that kind of work, together with the labor of building interdisciplinary conversations, is work that never ends. And I think it's important for us in this conversation to acknowledge that, I find myself regularly thinking, oh, we did that.
Yeah.
And the fact that we did that doesn't mean that we need to stop doing that. So, right.
Jeff?
Yeah, I suppose it's a response to the point one, why it's a field of working class studies to me, and it picks up some of the points that have been raised in these last couple of contributions. When I came to this field, it's what struck me about it was a theoretical capaciousness and generosity in terms of what multidisciplinary terrains were permitted as possible within it, because I couldn't find another area where there was the same permissions to speak across some disciplinary spaces that historically have not spoken well to each other. And I found that incredibly refreshing. And that was partly about the way that Sherry and Joe had set out the field as a field that problematized and continued to problematize, or would continue to problematize, its own terms of reference. And I think that's incredibly important. So for me, that's its distinctive character. I don't think there's another disciplinary terrain that does that. And I think in that sense, it is unique. It's a unique and important field. I think it needs to continue to do that. And maybe, if I can give an example, just talking to Larry as he left the room, I thought he made some points in the last, some really excellent points in the last discussion about the debate around post-work, anti-productivism, Kathy Weeks, that kind of stuff. That signals, I think, that it's easy in a field like this to become captive to notions of class and class action that are pretty, the genealogies through First International, Second International, Third International kinds of genealogy that primarily marks this of one form or another, and miss the fact that certainly in the UK, the dissident Marxisms such as Italian autonomism in the 1970s and anarchist strains are impacting on day-to-day working class action, particularly around precarious workers. It's a genealogy that seems to feed into that field. And I suppose that, for me, would be a contemporary thing that I'm noticing, that it would be the kind of thing that I'd expect this field to be able to accommodate in terms of the empirical material that we're reaching on. To be able to accommodate it theoretically. So it's its theoretical capaciousness that I would die for, kind of thing.
The last couple of comments lead me to this. In part, what we're doing is an intervention in both the structure of education and of intellectual work. And there's a little history that's useful to mobilize to think about those things. The history of women's studies, for example. And there are two things I would draw from that I think it's important to think about. One is early on in the late 60s and early 70s, one of the kinds of publications that people at the Feminist Press and at KNOW did were these books of syllabi, essentially. Syllabi and reading lists, so that everybody didn't have to reinvent the field every time you had a new course to teach. And those were quite powerful, not only in supporting people in the teaching, but also in dealing with the other side, right? The dark side to the dean. Say, it's being done here in California and in Pittsburgh and so forth. So that history is useful. The other thing that we did systematically, and actually before that in terms of peace studies, was to try consciously to intervene in the disciplines, to begin to create within the disciplines sections that dealt with peace studies, or with later with women's studies, and ultimately with gender studies as well. But the women's studies model there was very important, starting not only with the Modern Language Association, where it was very powerful, but in lots of other disciplines. And that helped to establish not only the field, but also opportunities. And you're constantly bumping up against, of course, the existing traditions. We're going to be bumping up against even more the politics. The politics of women's studies and ultimately the connection between women's studies and, let's say today, Me Too. Those are really charged. And if what was being said this morning, and I know Sherry's been writing and thinking about this, if the essence of many ways of capitalism is destruction, that's what we are engaged against. Engaged against the forms of destruction that produce profit. And so we need allies. And in that sense, mobilizing within the frameworks of existing disciplines and existing universities and colleges and high schools too, as is going on right now, that seems to me extraordinarily important for the future, not just of the organization and not just of working class studies, but the politics that lie behind those things. And in that respect, I think that looking at the history and doing the things that people have done before is very useful for us, and I hope you'll do that, or at least point in that direction in the handbook.
Yes, to the question of how it's useful. So on the campus where I teach, I floated the idea of possibly having a department of social class studies in the same way that we have departments of women's studies with degrees, departments of African American studies with degrees offered. So that's kind of been working its way through the bureaucracy, and it's going to turn out somehow, I think. But one of the questions is, well, social class studies. Who's doing anything on working class studies? From administrators. So this could be something that could be pointed to. Now we could say, well, African American studies looks at social class, sociology, economics, anthropology. I mean, it's interdisciplinary. But this is a concrete product. And so a major or a department like that would look at not only the working class, but the poor, and that's already studied on our campus. They've got a center with multi-million-dollar grants to study the poor, but also to study the middle class, the upper middle class, maybe even propose to study the 1%, the ruling class, the upper class. So,
well, that'll shut it right down, because they don't want to be studied.
Well, no, it's hard to study them, but maybe we could resurrect William Domhoff or something in some way. And people do still study the effects of the upper class. But still, this could be useful for people that are thinking about class studies as a whole, not just the working class. It could be a good model.
John?
I just want a quick plug. The book New Working Class Studies has also been used as a prop. Okay? I mean, we have laid it on the desks of provosts and deans when they said we want to do something. Well, what is this working class? We've done it to historians. We've done it to geographers. We've done it to anthropologists. And Paul, we tried all the sections we set up in all those disciplinaries in the late 1990s and even American studies. But it didn't get a lot of traction. But it was important to sort of generate the idea that there is something called, working class studies. And part of it also goes to what I talked about yesterday about self-identification. And I used the example of in the piece I wrote for the American Prospect. and identified people as working class studies scholars, not media studies scholars, not even labor historians. And I think when we had the conference at Georgetown with labor historians, who were one of the groups that really objected to what we were doing in the mid-1990s, when we went to their conference and suggested a panel with non-historians. And we wanted to, what's the modern term, disrupt? The idea of that, you really have to sort of take a personal commitment to say, I'm a working class studies scholar. There is something like that. And I may be working in history. I may be working in anthropology or whatever, but you have to take a personal stake in that. But that puts you immediately in conflict with some of the other people in your disciplines. So when one of this handbook has to have, I guess the term somebody said, uses, has to be sort of a prop to protect young scholars, especially in departments that are not necessarily sympathetic or understand what you're doing, and may not understand that we don't have a general methodological approach. We have multiple methodological approaches to study the issue of class.
Thank you. And I wanted to follow up on that, kind of coming out of several of the comments. Tim and Michele and I, one of the things that we're really deeply invested in with the volume is the citational practices of the people contributing chapters. So it's been a kind of constant refrain of ours to know that who's being cited, right? And making sure that key foundational texts in the field of working class studies are being cited and not just disciplinary scholarship. And that has been a really, I wouldn't say it's been contentious, but it has, sometimes has entailed back and forth conversation with some people who are contributing wonderful chapters, but who may not have been aware of that literature. And so, in our responses then are saying, like, could you please go read these things? Because they are so clearly, deeply connected to what you're talking about. And we are really committed to making sure that those things get cited, right, as a part of the book functioning as that prop that you're talking about.
And I'll add that the rewrites, the revisions, people are saying, wow, this is really great how well it fits. I didn't know about this. So it's building. This is really important to address your comment. There was something to that as well.
Yeah, sure.
At the risk of being a demonstrate now
I was about to say.
I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway, right? I'm sort of ambiguous too, so. But when we were talking about the future of working class studies, the phrase that immediately came to my mind was, based on what I'm going to present this afternoon, is how do we break our own brains as those who study and analyze working class formation and working class culture? Because what I'm going to present this afternoon, this is a plug, 3:45, I think we're in this room, on class affect and wanting. I'm looking at how learned modes of contention among the working class really develop and come out of that period of lowering inequality and real union strength and the development of that kind of nostalgic working class period. And they remain as a half-life, if you will, through this period when that world is just being destroyed. It's being hammered at from all different directions, and yet those modes of contention remain. And to me, they are connected. They become the same thing. So the picket line and the picket sign and the strike become the same thing as the vacation rental and the motorboat, right? For working class people. They're all kind of connected in this affectual web. And it remains, and so my question at the end of this presentation is, how do we break that? How do we form new affectual intensities and modes of contention that are fit for the structural changes that have occurred in capitalism? And the structural changes are massive, and they've created a new precarious class, and yet I think our analysis lags behind. So how do we break our own brains and maintain the integrity of political economy? We need to maintain the integrity of that sort of analysis, but construct an analysis that understands those changes ourselves. And I think, at least I'm going to say for me, I'm not doing that because I am stuck in this mode that says this is how classes form, right? And when you look at my case study, it's the Midwest, and you have a population that loses its ability to take care of itself through the loss of farmland and small communities, and literally is created as a working class as factories move into this area to take advantage of that labor market. And a working class is actually formed. That's not happening anymore. It's still happening, but it's happening very different ways. Finance capital is operating in a very different way from industrial capital. And I don't think our analysis has kept up with that. And I would like to see it kind of move. I don't know how to do it, but one of the ways I'm trying to do it is I'll go out on a limb and say outrageous things that piss off old school Marxists and say, like, we need to abandon that sort of analysis of working class formation. We don't need to abandon it. I think we need to just kind of update it and perhaps crack our own brains rather than break them.
I just wanted to mention something about us as an international organisation. I think that's really important in relation both to the handbook and the second question there, is that we are an international organisation, and with all due respect, we're not an American organisation, even though obviously our wonderful American colleagues said it. But I think we need to be aware of that, and I'm assuming in the handbook there are chapters from people from different parts of the world, but also in terms of what we might do in terms of our, not just our interdisciplinarity, but our internationalisation and how we might work with each other, and how we might, reach out to people from other places around the world who are doing really interesting work, and also consider how we might incorporate work in languages other than English as well. Because at the moment, we're bound by our own kind of limitations in language, and I only speak English. I don't have any other languages, but we're getting a sense through the journal that there's possibilities for articles to come in to be published in their original language and English as well, maybe. And I think that's something we should think about as we progress. Yeah, I mean, I have to learn some languages.
Come on for us.
Yeah, that's great.
I've got a couple of quick questions. I think might go in a slightly different direction, so I hope I'm not doing anything to say. But I am curious as to how a book like this might exist outside of a higher education or an institutional environment. What kind of uses might it have, and what kind of work can be done to allow that to happen? For example, is there an opportunity to provide supplementary material alongside the book, part of the website that says you might use parts of this book in this context, the ways to maybe expand it along those lines? So I think in terms of discussion of the disciplines, it maybe limits it. And so I am curious as to what can be done and what is being done to get outside of an institution like this.
It's kind of in response to what he said, though. Did you want some response to that first? Because this is a difference.
I think that can hang there and
It's kind of practical. When I was working on my project, my last project, I got, it was helpful for me conceptually, and you guys have probably already done this, but to distinguish between disciplines and fields. So you guys have the field, because, and I like that. I just wanted to say that and maybe explicitly even, because there is a field of working class studies. It's not a discipline. Like women's studies, it draws from all these different disciplines. So.
I've spoken already, but I just wanted to respond to what you were asking about. At the American Literature Association, I heard this wonderful panel that was about anarchist writing in Spanish and Italian in the United States, in Vermont, by people working in quarries, and in a number of places by cigar makers, which a lot of people know more about. It was just a wonderful panel about working class people writing, which often isn't considered adequately, but within that anarchist community, or the anarchist communities, mainly in Italian, as they say in Spanish. It was just amazing. And the group of people, young people, I didn't know them at all, in the field, they're kind of people you want to reach out to.
Chris?
I was just wondering, it's one on the question I kind of recognize beyond the U.S. or what's going on in other places. But there's potentially be a theme at a future conference of thinking about comparative working class studies and sort of have panels centered around that. And I was just thinking, even classic things like deindustrialization. I recently reviewed a book that's on deindustrialization in India and why. And I just contacted my grad students and doing work on deindustrialization in Johannesburg. And so that, you know, and it's doing what we're already doing, but maybe having that be the focus where it creates those connections and maybe that between the different volumes.
Yeah. Comparative working class studies. Yeah.
I got two other little things. In terms of interdisciplinary organizations, I'm on a member of the Association for the Study of Literature and the Environment, and that's kind of a cool organization, similar to ours in terms of people from a bunch of different fields. And I met somebody else who was a member of both organizations. Christina Robertson and Jennifer Winterman did an anthology working on earth, class, and environmental justice. And I thought that maybe eco-criticism is becoming big, and that's a possible alliance to develop. And I also keep hearing articles about how there are these instructional YouTube videos, and there are these people who play video games on YouTube, and they have this huge following from millennials, and they make lots of money making these videos, and that the right is really capturing that, and they're doing these strange alternative history YouTube videos that are totally false. And I was thinking one of the best things we could do is make some of our own YouTube videos and put them out there and challenge that kind of thing. But it could still be sort of meaty, like we could, I mean, I guess we're not going to please our rank and tenure committee, but, you know, we could still just have to speak English, quote unquote.
I just wanted to say, what Paul said, I was going to say this before, but my brain failed me again. Is that about the anarchists, is that I was really surprised when I wrote my article for this book, was to find out that 57% of the young people in the United States consider themselves working class. And that's coming off of a period where, you know, everyone's middle class. And the Democratic Party declared it pretty much in 2008. Michelle Obama got up at the Democratic convention, said I had working class parents. But then Joe Biden got up and said, the town I come from, people call themselves middle class. And then from then on, there's no mention of working class, you know. So I think it's really interesting that all these young people consider themselves working class, not because the term has even been available to them, but because they're working so damn hard and such precarious jobs.
Can I say something to that? The term working class is all over the place. It's everywhere now. And the question of it is, where are we in that debate? I don't want to rehash what I said yesterday. But the point of it is, there's a type of engagement and activism about the types of discussions that are going on and the definitions of working class and working class life, working class politics, working class economics, working class sociology. And all these areas are things that we should be engaging in and making the fight where it is. You know, if you guys all want to be anarchists, anarchists say you attack power where you are. But I'm saying as an academic, as a field, we have to gain that engagement. It's not that nobody's not talking about the working class. It's that we are not talking about the working class enough.
Well, we are, but not in the same arenas. That we're not being, in terms of what you're saying about public engagement.
I mainly work in a different discipline altogether, and actually I also put a handbook together, but the challenge to handbooks is always, and I pondered now the idea that basically what we're doing is titled here is Future Directions in Working Class Studies, and now you're asking us to help you with the handbook. Where I'm coming from, when we put a handbook together, that's sort of considered to be almost a sellout, because now we are establishing the status quo. And I believe in handbooks. I put one together myself, but at the same time, I want to challenge you to not use all of our time, our thinking to help you put a handbook together, but to engage us in conversation about the future directions. And I think John's point is extremely important. And when I look at your outline, the 6 points, I don't really see that you tackle the politics and the power structures in which we even as academics work, no less people who are not in academia. And so the way you're approaching the topic of future directions in working class studies is focusing us on the publication process, and I think that is very problematic as a political endeavor. And this is what we have been doing now. I don't have a watch right now, but let's say for the last 45 minutes. So I want to challenge you to, ourselves maybe, to really think much broader and not to focus like how could we organize the handbook.
So I actually think that's what the panelists asked us to do, and the audience comments have focused on the book. So
They gave us the table of content, which I appreciate. I like to think this way, but I think the powers that we face, even in our own institutions, it's not only working class studies that has difficulties becoming a department or program or whatever, a topic of a course, but it's the entire humanities and social sciences. My own university just spent in 1 year without blinking $6 million on data analytics.
But that's what we're trying to do to defend, and I think several people like to, and I think Jeff, I could have echoed that right from the get-go. What this field has given me is license to do stuff and leverage. So my institution, my career, working class studies has allowed me to gain power through, or power I have, through institution building, through actually when you, as John said, you put the books on the table and say, when they say, there's no such thing as working class, yeah, there is, and we can point to there's a 25-year history of it. That's how you both claim and defend. Mm-hmm. So it is a political act in what we're doing. It's not, if you think what we're trying to do is get people to do free labour, that's not what we want. What we're trying to do is get an open debate, and particularly, and I'd make a plea here for the younger people in the audience to contribute, not with no disrespect to the older people in the audience, including myself. But what we wanted to do in being open is make sure we as a field are relevant. And I think it's not always the case that working class studies has been seen to be relevant to some of the audiences that have to be relevant to working class studies. And it's part of that dialogue, but it's not kind of inward-looking. I didn't quite understand the criticism, but
yeah. I know I've spoken before, but I think I'm just young enough that I can play the young person card.
Great. Great.
And I'm also a little hesitant because, so this is my first time at WCSA, but I've studied the field for a while. I teach many of your books in my How Class Works class, so it's fun to be here. So I don't want to be someone who's first time here and saying this is what the field needs to do, but at the same time, like in my engagement with the field, there are two things that have struck me as crucial to the future. One of them also comes from my own positionality as both someone who does gender studies and critical race studies too, and that is, well, if we're just being honest, the field doesn't engage with reproductive labor enough. So like empirically, you can look at, you review the programs of the past conferences, it's a very minor thread that runs through. The reason I think strategically that's valuable is because that's one of the fastest entrees into engagement with feminist studies and critical race studies, particularly right now. So I'm trying to do an intersectionality grand slam, and this fall, I'm going to do a paper at the National Women's Studies Association that reflects how I think NWSA needs to think more about working class issues. And I think reproductive labor is one of the fulcrums that can open the door to, if we're honest, a continuing association that working class studies means people who care about white people, and particularly sort of traditional industrial. I know that's not true of this room. I think there are perceptions outside this community that have to be combated. I think reproductive labor is one of the angles to attack that. And then the other thing I would say is partly in response to Christie's sort of then comment on John's comment, and that is the question of the arenas and what arenas do we need to be in, and how do we bring the insights that we care about into those arenas. And one of them is, one of the most powerful representations of class is how pollsters and political commentators define class, right? Because that is the main way that the working class opinion is defined. And what I would love to see is, as a field, taking more of a lead in how do we train pollsters and political commentators to not simply rely on education and income as proxies, but to actually, a number of the larger polls do ask occupation questions such that you could use a Zweigian approach, for example. But very few pollsters and almost no political commentators know how to do that. So what kind of trainings could this group offer for those who produce the one form of dominant representation of the working class, so that we can start to tell, so that other stories are possible that are there, they're just not being told because the language and the vocabulary for telling them aren't in the hands of the people who control the stories themselves.
Jackie, I come here to this venue where I can consider myself younger. I don't know for sure, but to kind of reiterate what Tim said is that I first came to this conference about 5 years ago, I believe, and I found validation of my class identification and solidification of my class identification. I no longer have issue with being proud of that in the classroom, in my department, at my university, in my almost exclusively white town in Colorado. But my discipline considers working class, and a sociologist too. My discipline, at least my department, considers class passe. It's not sexy to talk about class. And so this is going to be a venue to really reaffirm notions of class and how important they are to the sociological literature. So I thank you for that, and I think that should continue.
Just to piggyback on the similar sentiment from somebody who's earned every white, gray beard, hair in my beard, still want to be young. My dissertation was so interdisciplinary that I couldn't get a fucking job. And it's because I took labor studies, literacy studies, literature studies, and prison studies, and put it in a blender and said, this is a side of labor and work, and these are conversations that we need to have. And this was the only place that took that shit seriously and said, there is something here. And I guess what I want to say is number 3, which almost none of us have addressed so far. Now that I have a forthcoming article in this book, I can lay something down and say, your discussions about industrial labor have to also happen in carceral spaces. And I want to know what's happening in England, and I'm looking forward to the conference next year to see, what are the international conversations about carceral spaces and labor and class and all of that there too. It was applying to 70 jobs and not being able to articulate these very disciplinary, period-based departments or discipline-based departments. You're not rec comm, you're not literature, you're not this, you're not that. And I think there's been a lot of criticism of what we haven't done, and this was true of last year, this is true of the first year that I was here. It's like, what can we continually do to reinvent ourselves? But I think we also have to kind of validate the work that we are allowing to happen here in an organic space. And I don't see this as a tombstone on working class studies, now we're going that way, because we don't have to begin a conversation of explaining what class is to people who don't know or don't care or don't want to listen, we can get to the work itself that matters in an interdisciplinary space without justifying it and then move forward. And so I feel like now that I have something in this that will be published and says forthcoming, I don't have to continually reinvent the wheel just to get to what I actually need to say from the outset. And so again, thank you for more than anything else.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to kind of make any comment because what you were saying, I've just heard up and I don't want to be like, so mine is more of a question really, but I guess it's kind of, to what extent do you see the handbook as kind of engaging in kind of ongoing social movement discussions and things like, I think one of the talks I was in this morning, the guy was talking about how, in social movements in the 60s, things would take place, and maybe you get involved in a campaign, and then you'd be like, okay, what would we do this and that, and the next campaign we'll try something else, and you learn from the mistakes, and you try to apply them somewhere else. And because there were so many campaigns and struggles going on, a lot of people were able to learn from those campaigns. But I think now, because there aren't so many campaigns, it's harder to document and to learn from those struggles and those campaigns. And I wonder, to what extent do you think this handbook could also contribute to documenting campaigns, documenting, I don't know, maybe as part of like labour studies or social, wider social movements, and sharing stories about the struggles that are going on. I don't know if that's something you've thought about.
Michele is kind of the primary editor of the collective action.
So there's a few pieces that they talk about that kind of engagement with social campaigns, farm worker awareness, things like that. But when the call went out, we published it everywhere, and we really tried. We did an analysis of all the conference programs, and we were hoping people would respond. So there will be gaps, but the comments I'm hearing are really helpful to frame the intro and the conclusion to say, this is not going to be a perfect, complete project, but the conversation that opens up to talk about this, talk about industrial labor complex. So these are really important feedback to receive, because we already have the table of contents and we're still working through that, but we can't take new submissions as much as I would love to, right? We can. But what we're hearing is such valuable information to frame, to say, this is a handbook, and now this is where we're going, and maybe like the journal can fill in some of these gaps, which is why this is such a nice combination and a collective experience of building the field.
Not tombstone of Austin.
Is it Joe, sorry. That when you were saying about how there's like a lag with our analysis of capitalism that seems to have developed in that, I kind of feel like, often, when we start from capitalism and see what it's done for working class, it can sometimes be, which is why I think it's really hard to theorize it like that, whereas when you see how working class people respond to capitalism, then it becomes almost clear of then you see what working class has done. It's what capitalism has done to the class. You see what I mean? It's like, I don't know, I guess it's like throwing like a pebble in a pond, and like you see it from the ripple, not from the pebble. You know what I mean? So I think that's the kind of aspect that is it's a good start from the class and to
Jessie.
I said a concrete suggestion, and I hate doing this because it would start with you, but it would end up being all of us. So it's a little bit of what tends not to do, but it would end up being us. Is to make the website better. And part, I think that would include soliciting from us, maybe with a Google Doc or something at first, our syllabi. To have just a repository for syllabi that we teach. Have a media list. So again, if you just set up a Google Doc, anybody who's interested could write, this is what I'm an expert in. I have reporters call me all the time and say, I know you study class. I got recently one about class and food. Could you tell me about holiday rituals that vary by class? And I said, I can't tell you anything, but I bet if there was a list, somebody in here at least knows somebody who does that, or maybe one of you does
does that, and I get regularly calls from the media that's like, I know you study class, but it's always about something about class that I can't address. So if I had a list, I could say, oh, just go to this website, and you'll find somebody.
So those are two areas that we've been working on. We have a media page now, say for inquiries, and as past president and Terry as president, we're the two contacts, and I'll change to Sherry and Terry, because then we can connect them to people. But we have made multiple calls on behalf of the organization to our membership. Send us your syllabi, send us everything you're asking, and no one has. So this is like 4 or 5 years of me running the website asking for this info. So if this is the place, I'll make that call. Send it to me and let that be your problem. So I have not yet received any material. And all I have to do is PDF on our website, and we have the how-to and have some of that information that some of you are looking for. But share it with us, and we'll put it there. But the website is separate from the book. That might be a completely different website.
Yeah, I think so. Orientation.
I was just going to mention in terms of future directions for the field generally, but then also specifically related to the handbook. One of the things that, one of the spaces that hasn't come up is libraries, public libraries, community college libraries, college libraries, and libraries, at least in New Jersey, have really become a space for a lot of conversation and discussion. Students, both high school students and college students, are flocking to libraries for conversation and discussion in ways I hadn't seen in a very long time. And at least in my area, faculty are being asked to go to public libraries and lead discussions and lead workshops with the public about various current issues. And so often they have like a once-a-month program where many of us speak. And so I could imagine. So one thing I would love to see, and this is something I talk about in my activism chapter here, is that for those of us who are faculty at colleges, we need to go out and speak to the public at large in spaces where the public is. So sometimes that's libraries. That's sort of a very easy space because there's often already things set up. And speaking to the public about issues of class and all the other intersectional issues that have been raised, but also thinking about the book in particular as a resource for libraries and to go out to local, I mean, if everyone went to their local public library, wherever it is on the planet, and told them about the book and asked them to order it, I mean, libraries are ordering books still. And so, and then volunteering to host a discussion once the book comes in, and then, pick a couple of sections to talk about and see what people are interested in. That's also a great opportunity for graduate students to get out there and do that kind of thing. For activists who participate in that, to lead these conversations. I mean, there's just so many different possibilities with that, but libraries, I think, are a really important space.
Yeah, just to say that the youngest members among us, or the newest Working Class Studies Association members among us, absolutely. What a powerful place from which to speak and to provide a fresh perspective and the freshest look at things, which just gets at what seems to be the larger theme among a number of comments. I heard tombstone and such like this, and I'm not quite sure. But the to use a scary word, but I love the word anyway, is tradition. We're in a traditioning process right now, and traditions are not tombstones. They're not reified blocks of stone that are inert and never change, but it's always growing and always changing, and we're responding to what came before and veering off, or maybe veering too far, or hewing too closely, or progressing in a good way. And so that strikes me very powerfully that this volume is following in the tradition of your volume and Sherry's volume. So what a powerful statement about the generativity and the creativity and the energy that continually gets poured into our work. And so what a privilege to be part of that, as well as this whole conversation as a traditioning process and contributing to what is to come. So
I just wanted to hold out that notion of tradition as a positive good that we all are contributing to.
Jack, your hand went up.
Follow up on something Daniel said and several others about working class studies being open and giving permission to all kinds of different approaches. And it goes back to the kind of Youngstown decision not to define working class. So that if we can all have different definitions, there doesn't have to be agreement to that. But I would like to see you in that final section talk about the difficulty of sustaining a commitment to working class studies over time, and being in your discipline, whatever it is. And I just think we've had a lot of great young scholars be with us for 3 or 4 years. They get that first teaching assignment, and they've got to really pay attention to their discipline. So, and there have been people in and out, and we make a contribution, even though our membership hasn't grown. It's a constant struggle to keep the level of membership. People come in, they draw from us, and then they do stuff with that later on, and then maybe they come back. But that very openness makes it difficult for us to establish a department of working class studies someplace. But it is what makes the field dynamic and open and providing spaces that people don't have because then we're resisting thinking within disciplinary boundaries.
I also wanted to add to that, Jack, that I was having a conversation with you and with Sarah and Cal last evening, and wondering whether the next generation may not be there, not because there aren't, because there's not interest in the issues, but because the structure, the nature of higher education is changing such that fewer people are going to graduate school, and the people who are going to graduate school are having a harder and harder time finding jobs, and so leave academia. So so that I'm just putting that out there as something that we may want to incorporate, that as we think about passing on the next generation, it's unclear the extent to which they'll be there. Nick had his hand up, he hasn't spoken yet.
Well, I've been meditating about the first question, and what's the field of working class studies to you? And I'm thinking of two things. One is, it's been a community. It's been a place and a set of people that I think I've been coming to conferences pretty consistently since the 90s in Youngstown, and where the work that I was doing was recognized, and then I recognized the work that everyone else was doing. And it supported it, and validated it, and extended it, and got me challenged the way I was thinking about things. So that's number one, a community. And the other was, growing out of that, it was also a body of work, scholarly work, actually. And I'm thinking, just off the top of my fairly sleepy head this morning, about some of that work, like Mike Zweig, and I'm thinking about the interdisciplinary or the disciplinary range of that work. So Mike Zweig's in economics, Janet Zandy's in women's studies, Dave Rodriguez in history, Paul Lardis in literature, Barb's in psychology, John's in labor studies, Jack's in sociology. And so the range of it, and these were foundational, these were acts of scholarship, these were books, actually, that shifted and defined fields, but everyone producing them identified as being in working class studies. So I wonder, speaking and thinking of what Ken said about tradition, I hope there'll be a way that we can continue to kind of recognize and honor and draw from that foundational work. And by the way, there are probably many other books that I'm just not thinking of at this moment. And recognize and foster the work that's coming up now and promote it so that we can continue to have these kinds of impacts in the disciplines that we work in. I mean, clearly the book we were talking about this morning by Sherry on deindustrialization and literature will be one of those books. And maybe the journal is the place where we do the reviews and promote that, and then we have the awards and so on and so forth. So, but just to say there's two things. It's like it's a community of people, and then it's a body of work.
for me.
I mean, just one of the things that we've tried to do in the introduction to the book is give a flavour of the field and why it's important. And one of the things, and I hope, Sherry, you would say this about your book. Your book would not have been possible without this field, but then the field wouldn't have been possible without some of the many of the contributions you've made. And you can see that through many of the books, Paul's book, Betsy's book, Jack's book. The DNA of working class studies is there's a dialogue, there's a leverage, there's a set of licenses and permissions that have been going on. I mean, Chris has gained from the field, and the field gains from X zero. And so, and there's a really interesting, I guess all fields are like this, but I think this field in particular, because it's interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary, that's emerged.
Yeah, please look at the books next door.
Yeah. We have a little less than 10 minutes left, just to keep us.
Just want to make a really small point about, and it's particularly germane to this field, it seems to me. I'm 65. I'm technically in the British research categories. I'm an early career researcher because I started recently. I've worked as a steel worker, I've worked as a railway worker, I've had a life as an activist. This to be in contact with this community is as fresh as it would have been if that had happened to me at 20. And I think it's really important for this field that it makes a space for people who've had all those lives that are maybe not coming through to the extent that they did do because of structural changes within higher education, lots of mature student courses, and so on. So it's important that we don't structure the field as a simulacrum of the trajectory of an academic career. I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah. Just making way for folks who we haven't heard from yet.
I also, this is my first time at the Working Class Studies Association, so I also feel a little uncomfortable speaking, because I really am just here to learn. I also come from women's studies. I'm a sociologist, but one of my primary homes is women's studies. So women's studies has come up a couple of times as a sort of, how do we think about working class studies in relationship to women's studies and the future of the field. And one of the things that's come up for me just in being here is, when I go to women's studies, I do work on race and I do work on class. And so in women's studies, class isn't prioritized, but class is present. It's absolutely present, and race is absolutely present in women's studies. And then this came on my radar. I thought, oh, working class studies. And I feel like we're in a moment of resurgence, of a moment of opportunity, right, for class to become more ascendant in the academy, in our political life, like I haven't seen in a very long time. So I was excited to come, like, oh, what are working class studies folks up to? Right, what a moment of opportunity. And I had left some of the class conversations, and I went over to women's studies. I mean, the classic article, Heidi Hartman, The Unhappy Marriage Between Feminism, right, and Marxism. And I thought, well, surely the traditions have changed. Surely we're no longer in this traditional marriage anymore. But when I've come to the organization, I see that it is still male-dominated, 65% in the room right now, just right. And then looking at the program, where I think there were 2 things on gender in the program, and I agree partly about reproductive rights, but that's not the only way, that gender shows up. And so I worry that maybe there's a missed opportunity right now, which is class is ascendant, but it must be in dialogue with feminism, and it must be in dialogue with the vibrant anti-racism that we're seeing right now. And so if you want to stay in this moment of opportunity, I think the organization has to ask some really hard questions about how do you prioritize intersectionality? How do you prioritize race? How do you prioritize gender? And that has to be in the program, it has to be in the process in the room, it has to be in the membership, right? There's a lot of work to do. So thinking about the history of women's studies, I was also thinking about the ways that women's studies as a white women's organization, if it was going to survive and remain relevant, had to do some really deep and hard work, right? This is Audre Lorde, an open letter to Mary Daly. And women of color were like, we're out, we're done. They walked out of the MLA. And so I think for me, I'm kind of sitting in that question. You want to talk about the history of women's studies as an academic field, you must grapple with these questions of male-dominated spaces and white-dominated spaces. And if you don't, it's just so tragic to me, a missed opportunity for some intersectional solidarity work. And right now, for me, as a woman scholar in an institution where women are adjunctified, women can't get into positions of leadership, a toxic masculinity and bullying across all of our institutions. And so if we're not going to have that conversation when we talk about the working class, I have to go back to women's studies. Because I think right now, also like many of us in these multiple marginalizations, I've about had it. Like I'm impatient with not having that conversation. And so I'm here because I really am committed that I think it has to be race, class, and gender. And so my question is, like, how is this organization going to grapple in a deep way to kind of come into this moment of opportunity for solidarity with anti-racism and women's studies? And that's where the moment is. And I see a lot of possibility, but I'm a little concerned also about whether that work is in the foreground enough. So I say that in a sense of solidarity, and not just from external critique.
What I would say very briefly, as someone who was on the program committee this year, is that I hope your experience here, that you go and tell some people that you know in different fields about this conference, because one of the problems we had was just number of submissions. And so I think it goes back to who are we reaching out to, how well are we publicizing this conference and what it can do and what it can offer. So I just hope that all of us here tell more people about this meeting, because then I think it can bring those submissions to us.
If I could respond, there's this perception, right, especially amongst Black folks, that when you say working class, you really mean white working class, and they don't give a damn about us. And the same thing with women, like you start talking about Marxists, right? There's this idea, gender's divisive, race is divisive, really it's about the proletariat. And so my concern is, when I go back to my department and they ask me, how is the Working Class Studies Conference? I know that's the question they're asking me. Is it worth our time? Has it changed? And so there's this recursive relationship. When I come and it's a male-dominated, white-dominated space, what am I supposed to say?
Michele wants to respond. I'd like to respond as past president and the organizer of the awards this year. We had over 64 nominations, and it was the most diverse group of books and articles and projects that have been proposed that cover the gamut of what you're saying and what everyone else has said. So I wrote a blog about it. Go check it out, because there's a lot of rich information there about how to feel people who might not identify as a working class studies scholar, but are doing working class studies. So they might not articulate that clearly, but publishers were nominating works that fit within our mission statement. So I think this is a way of seeing how your work is doing this, how people are doing this. So maybe changing that definition. Part of it is people have to also open up their eyes about working class and not automatically assume it's just this, because the program over the years has certainly reflected the growth and intersectionality that this organization embraces.
Two quick things. The first is that this is a conversation we've been having for 25 years. We are not unconcerned, and we are not unactivist about it. We've been doing tons of work. I actually went through the program for this year's conference. About 45% based solely on title. So not even getting to hear what the presentations were about, which, as it turns out, as I've listened to things, many more of them address these issues. About 45% by title alone address intersectionality. So the idea that we are not attendant to that is, I understand you look around the room and you see a lot of white people. That is a reality, but white people doesn't mean people who are not writing about intersectionality and not concerned with that. Just as male does not necessarily mean you're not involved in gender. One other thing I want to say, which I've been wanting to say for a while, because we keep talking about pulling people in, and I want to remind us of something that a lot of us have done over the years that I hope we will continue to do, which is also to reach out. One of the strategies we used starting in the late 90s, as John has already referred to, is, and as a number of people continue to carry on, is to organize sessions at other conferences about the study of working class life and culture, and to use those in part as ways of pulling people in. So we have a lot of sociologists here now. I wonder why Tim Strangleman, who started organizing things at the BSA around work and class at a time when class was tested in the UK and started to pull people. We've been doing it for years. There are going to be 2 sessions at the American, at least that I know of, at the American Studies Association conference this fall. One that some of these guys have organized. I organized one on contemporary American working class literature, very deliberately intersectional, very much trying to say, here's what this looks like. In part to be able to say to my colleagues in American Studies, your assumption that this is what working class studies is wrong. But we have to be doing that work in both directions. So we want people to come to us, fabulous, great, let's do all the outreach we can, but let's also be going to them and to let our colleagues in these disciplines where we say we don't feel at home, let's let our colleagues there who also don't feel at home find us by going to them.
One little thing you can do yourself is that, I don't know how many people get Working Class Perspectives blog. You now get 3,000 people every week come to that website from 172 countries, is it, Sherry? 172?
Something like that.
Okay. 44 times a year. And I do it to the Brits a lot. When the British writer writes for Working Class Perspectives, I send them a separate note and say, put it on your listserv of your own. Send it out to people. Because clearly the blog is called Working Class Studies, .wordpress.com. And it's Working Class Perspectives. Network. Use your own organizing skills. It's not a big thing that you read an article, you seem to like, send it to your friends. What is this blog site? And the other, because we really found one group that's really reading that blog site is the journalists. There's 137 journalists on our listserv, just journalists, okay, alone. And there's, 1,500 other people. So just do a simple thing like that. It's just to repost it. And that does a lot for field building.
Sorry, John, we need to get out of this room so people can have some lunch and also make it clear to people to come to